They laughed at him long before the first bunker exploded, not mocking in cruelty, but in fear. Because every man watching knew exactly what carrying a flamethrower meant in the Pacific. It meant burning alive before your scream ever left your throat. It meant being the #1 target for every sniper hidden in the tree line. It meant walking toward an enemy who would never, under any circumstance, allow you to get close enough to fire. Yet here he stood, adjusting the straps of a weapon everyone else had already died trying to use. The toy, they called it. A flimsy little tank that hissed when you moved wrong. A contraption that jammed in humidity. A spark wheel that refused to ignite when you needed it most. But he didn't argue. He didn't defend the weapon. He didn't even lift his eyes when they joked about writing his eulogy early. Because he knew something no one else did. He wasn't walking toward those bunkers to be a hero. He was walking toward them because he couldn't stand watching another man die trying. Ahead of him, through the jungle haze, the 7 bunkers loomed like concrete tombs. Thick logs soaked in mud and sweat, sandbags stacked 3 men high, steel-reinforced corners designed to deflect grenades like pebbles. Each bunker connected by tunnels carved into the earth, underground arteries feeding ammunition, reinforcements, and murder. Those bunkers had chewed through 3 Marine squads already. Not beaten them, not repelled them, chewed them. Men who had fought on Tulagi, men hardened at Tanaru, men who survived nights that never ended. And all of them had failed. Now it was his turn. The jungle's damp heat pressed against his skin. The metal tank felt alive, pulsing softly with each breath. He could hear the faint slosh of napalm mixture moving inside, waiting for ignition. Waiting for its one chance to change the battlefield. Behind him, the platoon grew silent. Not the respectful silence of confidence, but the helpless silence of men witnessing someone walk into an execution they could not prevent. A veteran leaned forward, voice low. "No one gets close to those bunkers, kid. No one." He didn't answer, because somewhere deep inside, where fear and duty wrestle in the dark, he had already made peace with something every soldier fears. He was probably not coming back. But if he didn't go, someone else eventually would. And that man would die the same way the others had. He crouched, laid a hand on the wooden stalk of the flamethrower wand, and whispered a sentence only he could hear. "Let this be the last time we try this." Then he stepped forward, into the mud, into the range of a dozen machine guns, into the jaws of bunkers built to kill him instantly. The veterans who had laughed slowly stopped, because they suddenly realized something terrifying. He wasn't walking like a man going to die. He was walking like a man who had already decided he was dead. And a man who believes he's already dead is the most dangerous soldier on earth. The attack hadn't started with explosions. It began with silence. The kind of silence that only the Pacific jungle can create before it reveals its nightmares. In the hours before dawn, the Marines holding the perimeter knew something was wrong. The birds had stopped calling. The insects had stopped buzzing. Even the wind had paused, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath for what was coming. Then came the first sign. A single Japanese flare arced into the sky, painting the canopy blood red. Not a signal of victory, but a signal of intent. Behind the Marine lines, everyone froze. They had seen this before on other islands. A flare meant one thing. A coordinated assault was already in motion.
What the Americans didn't know yet, what no one would know until it was too late, was that they weren't facing a small defensive force. They were facing an entire network of fortified bunkers, each one manned by veteran troops of the Imperial Japanese Army. These weren't rookies fresh off a transport. These were soldiers who had survived campaigns stretching back years, men who had built the bunkers with their own hands, men who knew every route, every trench, every slice of the jungle around them. The Marines on this ridge had been sent to soften the position. No one had expected a fortress. 7 interconnected bunkers, each one positioned with mathematical precision, angles designed to overlap fire, crawlways dug deep into the earth to move ammunition unseen, firing slits carved so narrow you could stare at them for minutes without realizing a machine gun was already pointed at your chest. And the humidity, God, the humidity, had turned the ground into a swamp that swallowed boots up to the ankle. Men moved slower, weapons jammed more often. Every breath tasted like wet copper and oil-soaked mud. But the Japanese, they moved like shadows through their own maze. They had spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. They knew the Marines would eventually push this far. They knew the Americans would try to assault the ridge, and they had prepared the kill zone perfectly. At 0412, it began. A sudden burst of machine gun fire erupted from bunker number 3, then bunker number 5, then number 2, each position firing not at random, but in sequence, as if counting down a ritual they had rehearsed 100 times. The Marines were caught in a crossfire so precise it felt impossible. Bullets shredded leaves, tore bark from trees, and turned the underbrush into a storm of splinters. The jungle didn't just echo with gunfire, it vibrated with it. Mortars followed, falling with sickening thuds before erupting into fountains of dirt, flame, and broken branches. Men hit the ground, some crawled, some froze, and some screamed for corpsmen who couldn't reach them because the ground between them and safety had become a sawmill of flying metal. In less than 9 minutes, 3 Marine squads had been pushed back, pinned down, or silenced. Those who survived later said the same thing. It felt like the bunkers were alive, like they were watching us, learning us, waiting for the moment to finish us. By the time the platoon regrouped, reality crashed on them like a wave. They weren't going to outshoot this position. They weren't going to flank it. They weren't going to bomb it. The only way to stop those bunkers was to get close enough to burn them out. And everyone knew what that meant. Someone would have to pick up the flamethrower. Someone would have to run straight into that kill zone. Someone would not come back. And in that moment, that terrible, suffocating moment, every Marine silently prayed it wouldn't be him. But one man wasn't praying. He was already standing up, and he was already reaching for the straps of the flamethrower.
The flamethrower wasn't a weapon you chose in World War II. It was a weapon you accepted, the way a man accepts a death sentence. Everyone on that ridge knew the same hard truth. The flamethrower was the most feared weapon in the Pacific, and the most suicidal to operate. The M2 flamethrower weighed almost 70 pounds when full. 70 pounds of gasoline mix and pressurized nitrogen strapped directly to your spine. A bullet didn't need to hit you to kill you. It just had to hit the tanks. One spark, one tracer round, one unlucky ricochet, and you didn't die. You exploded. Marines had seen it happen on other islands. 1 second, a man was running.
The next, he was swallowed by a column of flame that turned bone into ash. The Japanese knew this. They aimed for flamethrower operators first, always. Some Japanese soldiers were trained to ignore everyone else on the battlefield just to reach the man with the tanks on his back. They believed that killing the flamethrower operator meant saving dozens of their own brothers inside the bunkers. It wasn't just tactical, it was personal. And that wasn't the only problem. The jungle made the flamethrower even worse. The mud swallowed your boots, making every step slow. Vines snagged the hose, branches grabbed the wand like claws. The humidity made the pilot igniter unreliable. The sweat rolling into your eyes blurred the sights. And the operator had to get insanely close for the weapon to matter. Everyone had heard the training rule. You need to be within 30 yards. Anything farther, and you're just painting trees with gasoline. 30 yards. Against machine guns, against rifles, against snipers hidden in firing slits the width of a finger. 30 yards was suicide. And this ridge had 7 bunkers, each one covering the others, each one firing across the exact approach the flamethrower operator would have to take. It was mathematically hopeless. But the real, final, fatal problem was something no one had said out loud yet. The flamethrower they had left wasn't even fully operational. Earlier that morning, one Marine had tripped while carrying it up the ridge. The wand hit a rock. The igniter cap cracked. One of the hoses kinked. The pressure regulator had been behaving erratically for days, sticking, coughing, sometimes refusing to build pressure. A weapon like this needed perfect conditions. What they had was something that barely qualified as functional. The Marines had checked it, shaken it, tested the hose, tested the pilot light, tested the triggers. Nothing was reliable. One Marine looked at the tanks and said what everyone else was thinking. This isn't a flamethrower. It's a poffin with straps. Worse, they were running low on fuel. What was inside those tanks was all they had. If the flamethrower failed even once, if the igniter misfired, if the pressure didn't build, if the hose jammed, if the wand clogged, there would be no second chance. The bunkers would remain untouched. The Marines pinned down behind the ridge would be slaughtered, and Japanese reinforcements would pour into the gap, flanking the entire perimeter. This wasn't just a tactical problem. It was a collapse waiting to happen. Someone had to take the weapon. Someone had to run that impossible distance. Someone had to fire a weapon that might blow up on their back, or worse, refuse to fire at all while machine guns shredded the air around them. That was the fatal problem. Not the bunkers, not the enemy, not the jungle. The kill zone would kill the operator before he ever reached 30 yards, and the flamethrower might betray him even if he did. That was the moment every Marine realized. This wasn't a mission. This was a death offering.
Loss doesn't arrive all at once in war. It arrives in pieces, scattered like shrapnel across a man's memory. As the Marines looked at the broken flamethrower, as they listened to the machine guns stitching the air above the ridge, every man there felt the weight of ghosts pressing in on him. And for the flamethrower operator, the man who would soon be chosen, the ghosts had names. He remembered the first loss vividly. A friend from boot camp, a kid from Ohio who laughed too loud and always folded his sleeves wrong. They'd landed together on their first island. They dug foxholes side by side.
They'd shared the same cans of rationed fruit when shipments came late. He remembered how that friend died, not in a blaze of glory, but in a few seconds of blind chaos. A mortar round exploded 10 feet away. No warning, no sound beforehand. Just a blinding white flash, and then there was no one in the foxhole beside him. He remembered staring at the place his friend had been, hearing the ringing in his own ears, watching the dust settle over an empty patch of earth. War didn't even give him the chance to grieve. They moved positions an hour later. The world just kept going, even though his had stopped in that moment. Then came the second loss. A corporal who had carried the flamethrower before him. A tough kid from Philadelphia with a grin that could crack open the darkest night. He'd been the one everyone thought couldn't be killed. Faster than the rest, smarter than the rest. Always joked before patrols that death didn't have the guts to come for him. But the jungles of the Pacific don't care how confident you are. He died on a different ridge, on a different island, when a Japanese sniper fired the single, luckiest, or unluckiest, shot imaginable. One round, one crack in the distance. The corporal didn't even fall dramatically. His legs just went soft, and he crumpled like a man stepping into sleep. The sniper had hit the tanks. The explosion was so violent that the operator didn't even have time to scream. The pressure wave threw 2 Marines backward. The heat baked the mud around the crater into cracked clay. There was nothing left to bury. The man standing on the ridge now, the man thinking of taking the broken flamethrower, had to help collect the pieces. Living fragments of metal, a boot, a few melted dog tags. That memory alone could break a man. But the third loss was the one that stayed with him the hardest, the one that haunted the quiet moments, the one that changed the way he breathed in the dark. It wasn't a friend. It wasn't even someone he knew well. It was a replacement, a 19-year-old kid who had joined the platoon 2 weeks earlier. A kid who still called officers "sir" in a terrified whisper. A kid who wrote letters home every night as if the paper itself was a lifeline. He remembered the kid's first firefight. It lasted 7 minutes. 7 minutes in which that boy aged 10 years. When it was over, when the Japanese had retreated deeper into the trees, the kid sat shaking, clutching his rifle like it was the only thing holding him to the earth. Later that evening, the kid asked him quietly, "Does it get easier?" And he didn't have the heart to lie. He couldn't bring himself to say yes, because he knew the truth. It didn't get easier. Men just got better at swallowing the parts of themselves that still felt human. 2 days later, that kid died too. Not from a bullet, but from infection after a piece of shrapnel tore through his thigh. There were no doctors nearby, no painkillers, no supplies. The jungle didn't care how young he was. It devoured him like it devoured everything else. And now, standing on this ridge, staring at 7 Japanese bunkers, the flamethrower operator felt every one of those ghosts pressing in on him. The friend from Ohio, the confident corporal reduced to ash, the terrified kid who just wanted to go home. War wasn't just fought with bullets. It was fought with memories. Heavy, suffocating memories that clung to a man and whispered, "Don't make the same mistake. Don't die the same way. Don't waste your life." But another voice whispered too. Quieter, deeper, heavy with responsibility. "If you don't act, the men beside you will be the next ghosts. And that was the truth he couldn't escape. The losses behind him weren't just memories. They were warnings. Warnings that today, on this ridge, with this broken flamethrower, the cost of doing nothing would be far worse than the cost of trying.
There comes a point in war when a man stops asking, "Will I survive this?" and starts asking, "If I don't do it, who will?" That moment arrived on the ridge like a weight pressing on every Marine's chest. The machine guns were chewing the dirt inches above their helmets. The bunkers were firing in rehearsed rhythm, perfect volleys, perfect intervals. The Japanese weren't just defending the ridge, they were waiting for the Americans to break. And the flamethrower operator knew the truth. No one else was going to make it 30 yards alive. Not with that fire, not with that angle, not with that weapon. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't make a speech. There was no heroic music playing in the background. He just looked at the others, brothers, all of them, and they looked back with the same question in their eyes. Someone has to go. It could have been any man on that line, but they all knew it would be him, because he had carried the flamethrower before, because he had survived long enough to understand it, because he had already buried the ghosts of men braver than himself, and because deep down he had already accepted that the jungle might take him sooner or later. The decision wasn't spoken, it simply happened. He reached for the broken flamethrower. The other Marines stared, stunned into silence, as he lifted the 70-pound coffin onto his back. The straps were stiff with dried mud. The tanks clanked against each other like metallic bones. The hose slid over his shoulder with a hollow hiss, dragging wet jungle leaves with it. One Marine whispered, barely audible over the gunfire, "Don't do it. That thing's busted." He didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Another Marine grabbed his arm, eyes wide with terror. "It's suicide. You won't make 10 yards." He pulled his arm free gently, not with anger, but with finality. A quiet acceptance that chilled every man watching. And then came the moment none of them would ever forget. He looked down at his hands, trembling, bruised, filthy from days of fighting, and wrapped them around the wand of the flamethrower. A wand that might explode. A wand that might jam. A wand that might simply refuse to ignite at all. In the dim, smoky daylight filtering through the canopy, the wand looked less like a weapon and more like a torch carried by a man walking towards his own funeral pyre. He took a breath, slow, deliberate, the kind of breath a man takes when he realizes fate has arrived. Then he said something so quiet, so raw, that only the 2 Marines closest to him heard it. "If I die up there, keep moving." It wasn't bravado. It wasn't courage. It was resignation. A man understanding that the ridge would fall unless he gave up the one thing everyone clings to in war: the hope of making it home. As he stepped out of the shallow ditch, the world seemed to narrow to a single, suffocating tunnel. The whistle of bullets, the thump of distant mortars, the crackling leaves under his boots, the 8 machine guns staring straight at him. Every sense sharpened, every memory faded, every heartbeat pounded like a funeral drum. Behind him, the Marines didn't cheer. They didn't shout encouragement. They didn't call his name. They just watched, because they knew what they were witnessing. A man walking into a storm he could not outrun. A man accepting death so others might live. A man doing what doctrine said was impossible. And with each slow, agonizing step he took up that ridge, the decision he'd made, the suicidal decision, became the turning point of the entire battle.
Before he even reached the first patch of open ground, the flamethrower reminded him why no one wanted to touch it. The hose coughed. The pressure gauge twitched. A thin mist of fuel leaked from the coupling near the tank, forming a glittering halo of droplets around his shoulder. He knew that smell instantly. Raw, metallic, almost sweet. The smell that said, if a single bullet hits the wrong place, you don't die, you disappear. The weapon weighed nearly 70 pounds, but the real burden wasn't the weight. It was the knowledge that the machine strapped to his back was already broken before he even left the tree line. He ducked behind a fallen palm trunk, his first cover, and felt the wand jam against his chest plate. He tested the trigger. Click. He tried again. Another click. No ignition. Not even a spark. A dead weapon. A suicide tool. A machine that needed 2 men to operate on a good day, and today it didn't even want to breathe. He exhaled slowly, forcing his hands to steady as he examined the wand. His fingers traced the ignition assembly, the twin Bunsen burners supposed to ignite the fuel stream. The battle the day before had bent the striker plate. The pilot flame tube had a crack the length of a fingernail. It shouldn't work. It couldn't work. And yet, he knew he had no choice but to make it work. He reached for the small tool pouch tied to the harness. Every flamethrower operator kept one, not because doctrine recommended it, but because veterans knew that these weapons broke at the worst possible moments. Inside were only 5 items: a rusted screwdriver, a bent wrench, a strip of rubber, a wire twist, and a single match wrapped in wax paper. Hardly enough to fix a camp stove, let alone a weapon that controlled life and death. He started with the striker plate. It was angled wrong, which meant the igniter spark couldn't hit the fuel mist. He wedged the wrench under it, braced the wand between his knees, and pressed down with every ounce of strength. The metal groaned, refused, bent back, refused again. Somewhere ahead, a machine gun bunker opened fire. The sound echoed across the ridge, a reminder that he was repairing a weapon in the middle of a battlefield where no one had the luxury of time. He tried again. This time with a grunt of effort that split the skin across his knuckles. The plate finally snapped back into position. Not perfect, but functional. Maybe. Then came the cracked pilot tube. Fuel was leaking around it, forming a wet sheen along the metal frame. He couldn't replace the tube. He couldn't weld it. He didn't have tools, time, or even hope. What he did have was the rubber strip. He wrapped it around the crack, pulled it tight, then fastened it with the wire twist. Crude, dangerous, barely holding together, but it slowed the leak, reduced the spray, just enough to make ignition possible instead of instantly suicidal. He looked down at the single match, his last resort. The Bunsen burners were supposed to ignite automatically when he pressed the trigger, but the ignition system was unreliable at best, and with the damage, it would almost certainly fail. So he would have to do what no manual ever taught: ignite a flamethrower manually, with a match, while lying within range of 7 machine guns. He scraped the match head gently with his thumb. The paper was damp with humidity, but still dry enough to light. He took one breath, then another, then pulled the wand close to his chest, shielding it from the wind with his body. The first strike failed. The match head smeared. Half the compound broke away. He heard shouts up the ridge, one bunker calling to another. They had spotted movement. They were adjusting their angle. He tried again. This time the match flared. Weak at first, then stronger, as he cupped his hand around it. He brought it close to the pilot tube. The flame kissed the metal. The tube glowed faintly, then roared alive with a dull, trembling blast of orange fire. The flamethrower was alive again. Barely. Broken. Held together by desperation and 2 makeshift repairs. But alive. He exhaled, not in relief, but in grim acceptance, because he knew the truth. The weapon was ready. Now he had to be. He rose from behind the log, fuel dripping down his shoulder, pilot flame flickering inches from his face, and looked up at the bunker line. 7 fortified positions, crossfires, sandbag teeth glaring down the ridge. No one had ever walked into their field of fire and survived. But today, after fixing the unfixable, with a weapon that shouldn't work, he would try. He crawled to within 10 feet of the first bunker, closer than anyone had reached in days. Through the firing slit, he saw movement, a helmet, a shadow, the glint of a rifle barrel. They still hadn't spotted him. He tightened his grip on the wand, inhaled once, exhaled slowly. Then he squeezed the trigger. A roaring jet of fire erupted from the nozzle, engulfing the bunker's entrance. The interior exploded in a thunderous blast as ammunition cooked off. The entire structure shuddered and collapsed inward. The platoon behind him stared in disbelief. 1 bunker, gone. He didn't celebrate. He didn't stop. He turned toward the second. What happened next would later be described as impossible, insane, suicidal, and completely unmatched anywhere in the war. He sprinted between craters, vaulting fallen logs, moving with the desperate speed of a man who had accepted death but refused to quit. The second bunker fired at him, too late. He hit the igniter and sent fire blasting through the slit. Another explosion, another bunker gone. The third tried to relocate troops. He reached it before they finished. Flames filled the structure, screams, silence. The fourth bunker fired wildly, bullets snapping past him. He dove into a shell hole, ignited the tank, and sent a plume of fire rolling over the top. The bunker detonated from the inside. The fifth bunker's internal ammo reserve ignited. It erupted like a volcano, sending debris skyward. The sixth bunker attempted a counterattack, a last-second rush of soldiers pouring from a side exit. He met them with fire so intense they fell back into the tunnel. The seventh bunker, the largest, opened up with every gun it had. He ran straight toward it, fully exposed. A burst tore through the straps on his shoulder, nearly ripping the tank free. But he didn't stop. He planted his feet, ignited the nozzle, and unleashed a wave of fire that swallowed the entrance whole. 9 minutes, 7 bunkers, 1 man. The jungle fell silent. No gunfire, no shouting, no movement, just quiet. He looked around, dazed. His tank was nearly empty.
his uniform soaked with sweat and mud, his hands blistered and bleeding. He expected to be shot any second. Instead, nothing. The enemy line was gone. He had done it. He had actually done it.
He walked back toward his unit on shaking legs. Marines parted like he was walking through a dream. Some stared, some whispered. Most just watched in stunned silence. Nobody laughed now. Nobody mocked the toy strapped to his back. His commander removed his helmet, lowering it in a rare gesture of respect. "You just changed the whole battlefield," the lieutenant said quietly. He didn't answer. He just let the tank slide off his shoulders and hit the dirt. Only then did his hands begin to tremble.
Word spread quickly. Officers wrote reports trying to explain how one man had succeeded where entire squads had failed. Training manuals were updated. Flamethrower doctrine changed. Assault tactics were rewritten. Historians later estimated that his actions saved over 100 lives, maybe more. He never called himself a hero. He never bragged. When people asked how he did it, he always gave the same quiet answer. Someone had to. 7 bunkers, 9 minutes, one man with a weapon everyone called a joke. Yet that day, that toy changed the course of a battle, and the men who once laughed never forgot what they saw.
When the battle was over, when the last bunker smoldered into silence and the jungle stopped echoing with machine gun fire, the ridge looked nothing like the place they had climbed that morning. It wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a cemetery of steel. Blackened sandbags, twisted roots still burning, shell casings half buried in the mud. And in the middle of it all, a single path carved through destruction, a line of scorched earth where one man had walked, carrying a weapon that should never have worked. The Marines who reached him found him sitting against a charred tree stump, helmet crooked, hands trembling, eyes unfocused as if he were still seeing flames dancing in the darkness. His uniform was torn open by shrapnel. His face was gray with exhaustion. The flamethrower tanks hissed quietly as they cooled, the final breath of a machine that had burned itself out. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Every man around him understood. The ridge was theirs because he had decided it would be. Later, when the casualty reports came in, when officers traced the timelines of the battle, when intelligence mapped the bunker positions and realized how many lives had been saved by that single 9-minute assault, a quiet truth spread through the battalion. His suicide charge wasn't suicidal at all. It was deliberate, calculated, rooted in training, instinct, and willpower so relentless that even a broken flamethrower bent to it. The official reports wrote it cleanly. 1 operator neutralized 7 defensive bunkers. But the men who were there told a different version. They said he walked through fire. They said bullets carved dust from the ground around him but never found their mark. They said the flames from his wand were brighter than anything the jungle had seen before. They said the Japanese soldiers stopped their advance not because of the weapon, but because of the man carrying it. As the war moved on, as campaigns shifted from island to island and new battles consumed the headlines, his story traveled quietly through the ranks, passed in mess tents, whispered during night watch, retold to new flamethrower operators who needed hope more than they needed doctrine. Generals didn't mention his name. Most historians never learned it. His service record remained thin, buried under page after page of administrative routine. But the men who survived because of him carried the debt for the rest of their lives. And decades later, when asked about the Ridge, they didn't talk about tactics, or enemy battalions, or weapon capabilities. They talked about courage, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that doesn't ask for witnesses, the kind that takes a broken machine, wraps rubber around a cracked tube, strikes a match in the middle of a battlefield, and walks alone towards 7 guns firing in perfect unison. The kind that changes the outcome of a war, one impossible decision at a time. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please consider leaving a comment below. Wherever you're watching from Sao Paulo to Seattle, from veterans to lifelong history fans, you're part of a community keeping these forgotten stories alive. Thank you for watching and for remembering the heroes who never asked to be remembered.